We're on.
Thank you. We'll just give it 2 more minutes and then we will start. I'm Deepika Kinhal. I lead the Judicial Reforms Vertical at Vidhi Center for Legal Policy. We call ourselves Jaldi, Justice, Access and Lowering Delays in India initiative. I welcome you all for the launch of our latest report, Reimagining Consumer Forums in India and Introducing Spatial Design Framework to Court Infrastructure. This is a collaboration between Jaldi team and Srishti School of Art, Design and Technology. This is a first of its kind interdisciplinary effort under the aegis of Jaldi Innovation Lab. Innovation Lab essentially adopts a multidisciplinary approach to bring actionable solutions to some of the most perennial problems plaguing the judiciary. We conduct research on these issues, and once the Jaldi team identifies these issues as problems, we collaborate with experts such as those at Srishti to see what the solutions to these problems might look and feel like. I'm extremely glad that one of the first reports that we have come out with as part of the Innovation Lab is on court infrastructure. This, as we all know, is something that all stakeholders within the judiciary experience on a daily basis, but it is not really seen as one of the most pressing issues. Incidentally, that has changed very recently. Just last week, court infrastructure made headlines, surprisingly at that. Justice Ramana spoke about the importance of revisiting court infrastructure as an issue and what needs to be done going forward to make court infrastructure in India truly world-class. We will be discussing more about what he said and what we have discovered during the course of last 1 year while we were collaborating with experts at Srishti. So this event is a mix of launching the report as well as talking about court infrastructure in general. And we are joined by a stellar set of panelists for this discussion. It is truly interdisciplinary in nature. We have experts, top experts from their respective fields, the field of law and the field of design and architecture. Justice Sikri, he of course needs no introduction to anyone from any domain, but a quick introduction to him. He is the former judge of the Supreme Court of India and the current chairperson of the National Court Management Systems Committee. He has also been appointed as an international judge at the Singapore International Commercial Court under Singapore Supreme Court. He has been an active advocate of judicial reforms. So we thank you for being with us today. We are extremely grateful for your presence. Thank you. Then we have Dr. Sondhi with us. He is a senior advocate who practices before the High Court of Karnataka and the Supreme Court of India. He has also served as the Additional Advocate General of Karnataka. He regularly writes and speaks on issues concerning the judiciary and society at large. Thank you so much, Dr. Sondhi, for being with us here today. Thank you. Then we have Ms. Brinda Shastri. She is an independent urban design and planning practitioner with over 25 years of work experience. She is also an adjunct faculty in the Masters in Urban Design program at RV College of Architecture in Bangalore. Brinda's professional and research interests are at the intersection of spatial planning, urban governance, and urban design policy, where she develops methods to embed and implement place-based and inclusive urban design strategies within the planning framework. She has been involved in developing regional, city, and neighborhood level plans, where she focuses on institutional arrangements that shape urban form and space within the framework of inclusivity, equity, livability, and sustainability. Ms. Shastri, so glad to have you here, and I can't wait to hear all the perspectives that you will bring to the table to an otherwise lawyer-dominant forums that we usually have. Thank you for being with us here today. Then last but not the least, we have Dr. Gaurav Raheja. He is a professor of inclusive design and architecture who also holds the responsibility of professor in charge, inclusion and accessibility services at IIT Roorkee. He leads a research initiative called Laboratory of Inclusive Design at the Department of Architecture and Planning. Professor Raheja is a strong advocate of human-centric and social design approaches with a focus on invisible populations, including persons with disabilities, children, elderly, women, and others in the built and social environments. Recently, he has been appointed as a consultant by the National Institute of Urban Affairs to revise the harmonized guidelines and standards for accessibility for India. He has also been a consultant with the Ministry of Railways to draft the accessibility guidelines for Indian Railways. Thank you, Dr. Raheja, for being here with us today. This is truly a stellar interdisciplinary panel, and I can't wait to hear all the insights that we will hear from the experts today. And I'm assuming that the audience is equally a diverse bunch from both these disciplines that we are going to be talking about today. We also have with us, of course, the authors of the report that we are going to be launching. We have Reshma Shekhar and Shreya Tripathi from the Jaldi team, and Ms. Pooja Shastri and Preeta Dhar from Srishti faculty. Thank you so much for being here, and we will, of course, come to you soon to get a brief overview of the report itself. And I am assuming, yes, Ms. Mary Jacob is also here. She is the Dean of the School of Law, Environment and Planning at Srishti. Ma'am, thank you so much for joining us. I must thank you for all the cooperation and support that you've given us throughout the course of this report. Without that, this entire collaboration would have been impossible. Thank you for that, and thank you for being here with us today. With that, I think we can start with a brief presentation of the report. Then we will go on to hear Justice Sikri's keynote address and start with the panel discussion. So over to the authors for a presentation.
Thank you, Deepika. Pooja and I will be taking you through the presentation given our paucity of time. All four authors cannot be presenting. I'm going to quickly share my screen, and please do let me know if it is visible to everyone. Okay, sure. So the agenda for today's presentation is to take you through the objective and the methodology of the study. So we will start out with the special courts and the court infrastructure, followed by the objective and the methodology of the study. We'll also move into legislation mapping and briefly mention the limitations of the study and move on to a few examples from the spatial design framework that has been recommended as solutions. So with respect to special courts and infrastructure, so when we talk about justice system in India, we always talk about several issues, such as the legal framework, cases, the judicial vacancies and the pendencies. While these are critical issues that needs to be addressed, equally important is the architecture or the design of that space. So the way we see court space is, or courts are as two different spaces. It's workspaces as well as it's a space of service delivery. For some of the actors or the stakeholders who come to a court, it's your workspace, like the judges, the advocates, the court officials. While for others, it's a place of service delivery, like your litigants, your consumers, or even say your police officials, etc. So given that it plays a two-pronged role, the space or the design must be equipped to handle this or to, in a way, to deliver this. But we know the fact is not that case. And we are aware of the crippling state of physical infrastructure, which we tried to break down into what are the various issues with this infrastructure. So in 2018, we undertook a fact-finding study where we surveyed 665 district courts. And we identified what were the gaps in the infrastructure in these courts. So we were finally able to put a number to this problem as what was missing in these courts. And post that, in this study, we decided to look for the solution. So as Deepika mentioned, through this innovation lab, we decided to onboard experts from various disciplines who can provide solutions. And as a pilot study, we have taken consumer court and sort of piloted it with spatial design experts. So with respect to a core court infrastructure, we see that there are various gaps with respect to spatial management, organization of functions, and storage. What do we mean by these? Spatial management. On an average, let's take the example of a consumer court. A consumer court sees about 30 to 40 cases a day, but are courtrooms equipped to hold and manage the crowd that comes with 30 to 40 cases a day? We know that's not the case. Organization of functions. So a court, from the moment of filing of a case up until an order or a judgment is delivered, functions with several sections like a filing section, a pending section, a record room, etc. So these are what we call the functions. And a file movement or a consumer's movement or an advocate's movement is crucial to ensure that it is efficient from the time of filing till the time a final order is pronounced. So these functions have to be organized in a coherent manner in order to induce this efficiency. But again, that is not the case, since we see that a building is dedicated as a court and these functions are scattered across these buildings. With respect to storage, the size of case files piling onto corridors, courts is something that is been severally reported by various media. It's been something that's called out by higher judiciary and also in several case laws by even the Supreme Court. And that again is something that really affects the infrastructure. With respect to the utilities, there are several, to highlight a few of these issues, we know that parking, security, fire safety, these are facilities that are mostly lacking in these court structures. Waiting areas are not well ventilated. There are not adequate seating capacities. With respect to hygiene is concerned, we see that toilets are not well maintained. There is absence of facilities such as drinking water or waste disposal. And last, but another crucial gap that most of these court structures have is with respect to accessibility. If you're talking about persons with disabilities or otherwise, there is absolute lack of navigation tools, signages, ramps, tactile pavements, etc. that makes these spaces like they cut out these persons from these spaces, and there is a huge question or a huge discomfort of accessibility that comes into question. All of these gaps lead to challenges. They are practical challenges that give rise to infrastructural challenges as well as administrative challenges. Now, in the case of special courts, like the study has been piloted, this need is felt even more. A need to have the adequate infrastructure is felt even more because they come with special needs. Maybe POCSO, where there you see that there are children, there are families that come, and therefore the design and the architecture needs to cater to them, or it be consumer code where consumers are self-representing. So these have to be factored in and they need to reflect in the architecture. So with these in mind, the objective of this study was to inform the stakeholders, most importantly, the decision makers, that it's time to have specific thinking on code design and architecture, and that it plays a very critical role in making sure that these spaces function efficiently. So roughly the methodology that we follow, which as Deepika mentioned earlier, which is a hybrid methodology. I request Pooja to weigh in on the methodology.
Shrishti's collaboration with Vidhi on this project basically began with a studio, a 5-week studio like we usually have in Shrishti for the third year students of the Bachelor of Public Space Design. So this was pre-pandemic. So they were able to visit the courtroom, see how people were moving within the courtroom, what the functions were. They were able to take measurements and really understand the space. And a lot of the work that you see in this report is based on their observations and the work they did. For the purposes of their learning, they had to design a small consumer court on the same site, which is the current site of the Karnataka State Consumer Commission. But we, that is Mary, Preeta, and I, who were facilitating the studio, continued to work with Vidhi even after the studio was over. We went back for a couple more site visits. We took more detailed measurements, took more detailed observations. We actually built on a pre-existing relationship Vidhi had with the registrar there, and we really understood the number of people, what they were doing within the court, and what the existing shortcomings were. Now, these we combined with detailed legislation mapping, which Reshna will explain to you in subsequent slides, to be able to come up with a spatial design framework.
Yeah. So to take over the legislation mapping, so apart from field visits as well as the studio, which again, like to just reiterate what Pooja mentioned, both the registrar, the president, and the assistant registrar of the Karnataka State Commission, they granted us specific permission to conduct these studies, because of which post the court hours, we were able to go with the faculty at Srishti to measure these premises, to measure the courtroom, to measure the various offices within the consumer complex, and that really helped, and also that really added on to ensuring the comprehensive nature of the study. So in the legislation mapping exercise, what we undertook was to go through all legislations, all the 5 legislations surrounding consumer protection that we have in India, and to break down the provisions of this legislation and convert them into what could possibly be an infrastructural equivalent. So and we also feel like while NCMS in 2012 made a similar attempt without retracing it to the legislation, this is exactly what NCMS attempted to say, what should subordinate courts have? So we sort of broke down the legislations and to sort of derive what should these portions have. So to take you through a quick example, we've just highlighted 2 legislations here. If you go through the report, you can see all the other provisions that we have deconstructed in the similar manner. We go through the Consumer Protection Act of 2019 and the regulations of 2005. So if you look at sections 28, 42, 53, and 54, these deal with the establishment of the district, state, and the national fora. So they go on to say that every state, every district, and the central government must establish these fora. These fora should consist of members, and it should have at least 3 members, etc. How we deconstructed them is, if you were to have these fora, there should be provision for land, there should be provision for space, by which we include chamber space for the president and the members. This also implies that there should be courtrooms, and these courtrooms should be adequate enough to hold hearings and also function round the clock from morning till the evening, which is expected of them. And given that the pandemic happened right in the middle of the study and we moved towards a virtual hearing and the likelihood of a future where there will be a hybrid hearing, hybrid model of functioning, what we also recommend, what we also reconstructed them is to include what are the technological or virtual tools that these courtrooms should be equipped with in order to function in a hybrid model. Similarly, in section 35, that talks about manner in which complaints shall be made, where they talk about how a consumer should be making these complaints, and also about how these complaints can be made in any manner, and they talk about even fees being filed electronically. We deconstructed it to add the following factors: that there should be a separate office for filing, and that there should be accessible e-filing laws that also cater to multiple consumers at the same time. And given that there is so much consumer legislations, self-representation by the consumers, we also stress upon the need for information desks or receptions of which regarding the process of filing. Moving on to the Consumer Protection Regulations of 2005. So, this is in fact the only legislation where there are specific infrastructural requirements that are embedded in the legislation itself that we have borrowed, and also we've read into further to see if there are any additional requirements. For instance, Regulation 3 talks about arrangements in the consumer forum, and the legislation itself lays down that the members' dais must not be at height of more centimeter, and all chairs of the members must be at an equal height. This is to deconstruct the model of hierarchy that's usually followed in a judiciary, and because these are supposed to be courts that are welcoming for consumers, and therefore it cannot show any representation of hierarchy. Similarly, if you look at regulation number 19 that talk about return on institution and disposal of cases, this regulation, this section goes on to read that every consumer court must be equipped to handle at least 75 to 100 cases daily. We go on to read it to say that there should be a pending section in the court complex that can handle this volume. So there should be some kind of calculation that has to be done to calculate the amount of storage that is required, given this is the daily volume that the legislation envisages, and that there should be easily accessible and retrievable storage, because as we know, storage is one of the main issues that are currently there with the infrastructure of these courts. We've also heard and seen of instances where higher judiciary have reprimanded lower judiciary of files being missing or documents or crucial evidence being missing. and also suitable working spaces for all employees. Given that this is your caseload a day, there should be suitable workspaces for all employees and employees, members, as well as consumers or advocates who are persons with disabilities, and also appropriate ventilation and lighting. So but even though we were equipped with the field visits, the studio, and the legislation mapping, while undertaking a study of this scale, which has not been previously done, and also having to involve experts of different kind, there were several factors that we couldn't take into consideration. So Pooja will be taking us through some of these limitations that we faced.
Thanks, Reshma. So one of the advantages was that we had hard numbers from the Consumer Forum, the State Commission, and the District Commission in Bangalore. So we knew the footfall, we knew the number of cases, we knew the storage volume that was required. We were able to calculate room sizes, room areas, room volumes based on these numbers that we had. We were able to provide optimal space for every staff member, every admin member within their offices. However, on the right is a list of things that we couldn't take into consideration. Budget, we can't predict that. We have also stayed away from specifying or being very particular about materials for construction, landscaping, ventilation, position of windows, things like that, because these are very dependent on climate, daylighting, specific circumstances in every district, every different part of the country. And we do want the principles put down in our report to be usable anywhere, to be applicable anywhere. Similarly, signage and information design, this is a non-spatial aspect. So since we did not have extensive expertise in it, we have mentioned it to the extent possible in terms of where it should be placed spatially and what the specification should be according to the Rights for Persons with Disabilities Act 2016, but we haven't detailed it further than that. In addition to that, technology, digitization, computerization, e-filing, this sort of back-end infrastructure that needs to be there, especially in this time of virtual hearings, of there being the need for digital records in the judiciary, we haven't been able to address that in detail either. Now we'll just quickly explain to you the spatial design framework that has been used in this report. Now, in addition to the utilities that Reshma listed and the provisions which are already there in the legislation that you saw, for us, the process of arriving at a spatial design framework is based on two important steps. One, to be able to properly understand the people and functions which are already there, the way they interact in the existing court, because that needs to also be there in the reimagined court. And two, for the process of reimagining the court, to be able to place those same people and those same functions in a more comfortable, a more efficient, a more optimal, and we hope a more happier space. Essentially, the first step involved mapping and understanding, observing processes within the court, the movement of a file from the time it goes to the filing section to the time it ends up in the record room, who talks to whom, who needs to be in constant contact with whom. And the spatial designers on this webinar will understand this process as an essential first step to spatial design, the adjacency or circulation diagram, where we try and figure out which room has to be placed next to which room and which room need not be placed next to the other rooms. An earlier iteration of our report actually had a sample floor plan, which we decided to remove because there is no actual one correct or one true way of arranging these rooms. As long as the functioning of the court is properly understood, that you understand who needs to talk to whom for the court to function efficiently, there can be many different, all optimal, all functional, all logical versions of this adjacency diagram. We have tried to provide 4 which we feel make sense to us in this report, which includes all these various functions, from core court functions to supporting functions to ancillary functions. However, there may be many more than that. The common denominator in all of these that we've tried to bring down from our observations is that, one, the court hall needs to be next to the pending section, the filing section needs to be close to the entrance, and the registrar needs to be connected to as many administrative functions as possible. This is true for the consumer court, but it may be true for other courts as well. In addition to this, in terms of an optimal layout for the courts, we have also come up with floor plans and cross sections for every room in the consumer court. And we quickly want to take you through 2 just to give you an idea of what we try to take into account. This is the filing section. What we observed in the filing section is that in the existing court is not close to the entrance, and also it's a very close space. So we try to open out the space to have clear lines of sight to the entrance and also within the space. So anyone coming in, the consumers coming in, can see where they have to go. They understand that there is a counter there, almost, I mean, reminiscent perhaps of, more spaces which are designed in this very functional way. Think of a bank or maybe a train station ticketing counter. You need to know where to go without somebody having to explain it to you. They've tried to provide access to a stationery cupboard, to a table to sort of modify and fill out forms, a photocopier. We've also tried to include, as you can see to the right, 2 e-filing kiosks, which we feel will be particularly useful in districts, parts of the country which are a little bit more remote, may not have constant access to Wi-Fi, internet, or printers, so they can come in and then key in the details of their complaint. The second floor plan that we want to quickly show you is, of course, the courtroom, which includes members of pretty much every user group of the court. Members of the general public, appellants, admin staff, members, everybody uses the space, and the space has to be designed for all of them. So for us, the courtroom has 2 important zones. One is the so-called active zone, where for us the hearing takes place, the relationships between the bench, the stenographer, the bench clerk, and the parties. In this active zone, the lines of sight as well as in acoustics must be very clear. They must be able to both see and hear what is going on. In the more passive part of the court, the most important change or sort of indication that we try to make that is different from the existing Consumer Commission in Karnataka is the presence of the horseshoe table, which we have removed. One thing is to make more place for the general public and for the appellant so that everyone is on the same board. And 2, to kind of subtly reinforce that we'd like people to not necessarily rely on advocates, but represent themselves as consumer forums encourage them to do. The 3 non-spatial aspects, one might say, which are important for the court are information architecture and design. You can see that we've tried to place case display boards, not just for the general public, but also within the line of sight of the members. Sufficient technology infrastructure for virtual hearings so that a camera is focused on the member and screens can show those who are attending the hearing remotely. The third is acoustics, which is really important in a courtroom because above all, you need to be able to hear and to be able to be heard when you're speaking. Now, acoustics change if you're using speakers and acoustic enhancing equipment. So information technology as well, information and as well as this acoustic infrastructure must be designed for a court in conjunction with experts. For us, basically to sum up our work in this report, the idea is that this report should be usable, the principles should be easy enough to use to apply even to existing consumer fora, which may be sitting in a rented building, but just by being able to follow some of the things put down in the report, you should be able to make them at least slightly more efficient and increase storage space for them, maybe with a little bit of civil work. But overall, the intent for our report is for what we've laid down to be adapted by anyone in any part of the country while designing or maybe even retrofitting an existing building for a consumer court, according to their specific circumstances, their specific geography, their climate, their materials. It should be sort of ready to use, basic areas, per person areas, basic principles that they can immediately adapt. With that, we the authors have reached the end of the presentation. Thank you for your patience, and we're handing it back now to Deepika.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Reshma and Pooja, for that brief yet extremely insightful presentation. I'm sure all of us have a few key takeaways from that presentation. And congratulations on this extremely wonderful collaborative exercise. Who would have thought that lawyers and architects and designers could work as well together? So I think this is definitely going to be a first of many between the 2 organizations and definitely between the law and architecture fields. I should also definitely mention here that this report would not have been possible without the generous support and cooperation extended to us by the President of Karnataka State Commission, Justice H.G. Ramesh, the Registrar General, Mr. N. Raju, and Assistant Registrar General, Mr. Ganesh S. We are extremely thankful for giving all the permissions that were necessary to take measurements, visit the fora multiple times, and also interact with the staff to truly know their grievances, which have contributed to the making of this report. With that, Justice Sikri, I hand it over to you to deliver the keynote address.
Thank you, Deepika, and good evening to all the panelists as well as all the participants who have joined here witnessing this release of this report. I must congratulate, as all others are also thinking, the team which has prepared this stupendous and meaningful report, undertaking such a task which was not that easy, and particularly when you are not talking about the normal court system, but have taken the project in relation to the consumer courts. Of course, what is stated in the report insofar as consumer courts are concerned, it is going to be of immense help when we come to the infrastructure of other court system and other tribunals as well. So therefore, let me first congratulate the team, particularly Reshma, Pooja and Shreya, for undertaking this project. And of course, along with Srishti and Jaldi, under the auspices of Vidhi, and the kind of support that has been given by the persons in the field, in the sense that what I'm trying to talk is about the persons in architecture, etc., who are experts in their field, including Brinda Sastry and Gaurav Raheja. And as we have heard, the nature of support which they have given. And it, as Deepika has rightly mentioned, that it shows that even when we talk of reforms in judiciary, it is not that we have to just think within, and as if the solutions to many problems are possible by those who are working within the system. We have to reach out to others, not only other stakeholders, but the experts in the other fields as well, in order to bring those reforms. Be is the architectures or the, I would say, all insofar as the infrastructure is concerned, or in other respects when we talk of bringing proper management into the court system, then we have to, and it gives us a message that then we have to reach out to the management experts also. And therefore, why I'm making this comment, there is a reason behind it, because I have seen over a period of time, being a part of judiciary for 20 years, that mostly when it comes to judicial reforms, the judiciary wants to bring those reforms, but then they don't want to look outside. They think that they have the solution for everything, which is a misnomer. And we have to have a broad view, a broad vision about it. And there has to be an inclusive approach by including others as well who are experts in their field, and they can give us such interesting and such meaningful tips, which this report projects. Now, a very interesting thing which happens, I'll come to the consumer court specifically, and on this report after some time. But before that, let us start with the fundamental question as to why we are giving such an importance to the infrastructure. Now, one way of looking at it, or in the first blush, one may think that, look, infrastructure is necessary. We should have better courts equipped with better system, whether these are computers, etc., or other facilities which are given there. The judges should be comfortable, the litigants who come there should be comfortable, the lawyers should be comfortable. But is that all? That is, of course, necessary, no doubt about it. But more importantly, I would say that it has direct connection with access to justice. And this connection of the better infrastructure with access to justice has to be measured and has to be looked into and perceived in a proper sense. That is very, very important. And I am happy to note that Vidhi itself, when it came out with its report in 2019 about building better courts, of course, that was about the better courts. And as I had gone through that report in a very lucid manner, this connect between having better infrastructure or better buildings with access to justice was brought about. Uh, 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 I may say that you see the courts are providing the services of dispensing justice. In that sense, they are service providers. Maybe, yes, it is one of the functions of the state, sovereign function of the state, as we call, and that is assigned to the judiciary, no doubt about it. And the judiciary is supposed to perform that. But at the end of the day, we are that the judiciary is fulfilling the mission which is contained in our constitution. The very preamble of the constitution, if I may say so, it says that the people of India having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign socialist secular democratic republic, and to secure, I'm emphasizing, all citizens justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. So the four goals which are there, which are enshrined and are imbibed in this constitution, foremost is doing justice or securing justice to all citizens. And it says justice, social, economic, and political. Of course, it may be stated at this stage itself that doing this kind of justice, which is stated in the constitution, is not the only, not the function which is relegated or which is assigned only to the judiciary. Executive and parliament have also to do justice in their in the manner they are supposed to perform that, by passing appropriate laws which do justice to the people, and by implementing those laws. But the whenever disputes arise and the rights of a particular person are infringed, he has to look upon to the judiciary to resolve those disputes. Final arbiter in resolving those disputes and in dispensing justice, that role is assigned to the judiciary. So therefore, this judicial role has to be kept in mind of access to justice. And if I may read here the words of Justice V.R. Krishna Iyer, a great scholar and jurist and judge, which Independent India has produced. In respect of access to justice, he says, access to justice is basic to human rights. The right to justice is fundamental to the rule of law, and so we, the people of India, have made social justice an inalienable claim on the state, entitling the humblest human to legal literacy and fundamental rights, and their enforcement a forensic reality, however powerful the hostile forces be. So this is what he says, and in the process he adds, declaration and proclamations, resolutions and legislations remain a mirage unless there is an infrastructure which can be set in locomotion to prevent or punish a wrong and to make legal right an inexpensively enforceable human right. And number two, injustices are many, deprivation victimizes the weaker section, and minority suffers the oppression syndrome. So although when he says that there is an infrastructure, he is not discussing infrastructure in the sense of physical infrastructure, but what is the take from this quote? That there is a declaration that laws and fundamental rights are there, give rights to the people of the country. There is a declaration that everybody has right to know these rights, and there is a recognition that these rights are infringed, and the victims have to come to the court to seek redressal and enforcement of those rights. And therefore, access to justice is also a right, and it is enshrined in Article 32 of the Constitution as a fundamental right as well. And what it recognizes also is that it is not available to many, and therefore it is the duty of the state, which includes the judiciary, to provide this right to the masses of this country. Now, of course, I have been talking about the access to justice and where the infrastructure comes in. But here I would say that access to justice has two facets. Access to justice means, first, approaching the court. I am able to access the courts and able to file my case if I have some grievance, and that access is provided to me. And other is getting justice from the court. So that is a facet of the access to justice for the court. So what is the interconnection between the two? That when access to justice to the courts in physical sense, how it is going to uh, aim at providing justice as an essential ingredient or precondition for providing justice. If I may here say that in the earlier report, which I have seen of 2019, which was which the Vidhi came out, it's as I told earlier, a very nice study which has been made in this behalf. It starts with by saying that look, there's not much studies even in other countries about it. Of course, in India, there's hardly any studies about it, but of late, people all over the world are now perceiving this and now recognizing this need, and they are working on this. And it quotes Dr. Aparna Chandra, points out access to justice as a concept has been interpreted merely as access to courtrooms rather than as a holistic approach that embodies a perspective that informs all aspects of judicial functions, including decision making on substantive rights, construction of procedural norms, and administration of judicial setup. This administration of judicial setup becomes an integral part in this sense. The relation between access to justice and judicial architecture has only been seen with the lens of pendency and vacancy, which was emphasized by the three ladies who have presented the report. There have not been many conversations on the role of infrastructure, and the only discussion that are done are quantitative nature, which means building more and more courtrooms only with no or very little emphasis on modernizing existing courtrooms and their facilities. Since significant resources have been spent on existing courtrooms, there should also be development strategies to modernize existing courtrooms and equip them with better technology and other infrastructure. So therefore, when we talk of access to courts in physical sense, and which is very beautifully presented in the report which has been presented just now, it says about what are the challenges. It was said that the core court infrastructure, the practical challenges and utilities. From that point of view, all those utilities which are needed, they aim at providing justice. Because one thing, let us be clear at this stage, that the judgment which is given by the court at the end may be ultimate aim of providing justice, the end result. But end result is achieved only when there is a level playing field. And the process of evolving and reaching to that conclusion is also very, very important. And this process is facilitated by proper infrastructure. If I give you one or two examples only, that which was stated also by the presenters of the report, that we talk of vulnerable witnesses. So suppose it's a case where a teenage girl is the victim of a rape committed by maybe some family member or some person who plays dominant role. It may not be possible for her, or it's a case, even say a case of a gang rape of a girl. So if it is a common courtroom, a normal courtroom, where she is present to depose in front of all those accused persons who are there, she may not be in a position to depose freely and frankly. She may be under threat of a threat which may be of varied kinds. So therefore, there is a need to have different kinds of witness rooms from where she can depose, so that and such kinds of infrastructure is now created. But the example which I am giving is that how she will get the justice if she is not able to freely depose what she wants to depose. There may be cases, say I give another example, in a family dispute between husband and wife, or a testimony of a child, their own child, is necessary. Now, if that child, he or she, is not in a position to give the deposition freely and independently with her own volition, but is made to give this deposition in the presence of her parents, she may not be able to depose. There may be so many such circumstances. But then uh, this just explains my point that the process of making justice and creating level playing field is so important ultimately to arrive or to do justice. And their infrastructure comes. And here, when we talk of this infrastructure, it is not only this. Let us talk about now. I talk about ADR or mediation, another example which I gave. Now, we know that mediation, after the introduction of Section 89 of the in the Code of Civil Procedure, the courts are now referring the matter for mediation. Now, court may refer the matter for mediation, but in a district court, in a small district, if we don't have mediation, proper mediation center, where the parties can sit and hold those discussions, that is a part of infrastructure. Now, how mediation would be successful? And in the same manner, although this is one of the limitations which has been stated in this report which they have prepared, that is, they could not go into the technical aspects and digitization, but that also is so important. Now, it is the computerization or the digital system which again leads to dispensing of justice. Best example is in these COVID times, where we had to start, because of COVID and lockdown, we had to start virtual hearings, online hearings. But in case the proper infrastructure is not there, that I have seen in a place like Delhi, even some of the judges may not be, and in some of the courts, they may not be having and they are using their own laptops many times. They are not having those kinds of computers. I'm not saying most of them are provided, but some of them. But then Wi-Fi system is not that efficient. There are so many hiccups when this comes. So infrastructure becomes important. But this is the state of Delhi, I am saying, where, of course, more or less the problem is there is no problem and it is resolved to major extent. But what about small courts and Mufassil courts? We have proclaimed, when we are saying that, look, during this lockdown period, and when because of this pandemic, when physical hearings are not possible, courts are functioning. But if somebody makes a study whether all the courts in the entire country are functioning in that manner, I have my doubts on that. And therefore, infrastructure again plays an important role. Computerization plays an important role when it comes to access to justice. And it is the computerization leads to, as a chairman of NCMS, I can say so that what we have been doing, it facilitates court management, it facilitates case management, which the judge can undertake. It facilitates, we have seen service of summons and use of digital library, and for the lawyers and litigants, availability of information as to what is the stage of their case and what for it is listed, etc. If all that information is available on the website of the court. So therefore, in all these respects, what I wanted to say here was that the infrastructure is so important when it comes to access to justice. So having said that and explained the importance, let us come to the consumer court specifically. I need not go into and revisit the report, because that has been explained brilliantly by the three lovely ladies here. And what I want to say is that what are the takes from this report? That is, number one, it shows, because it is the research or this project involved two things. Number one, only consumer court, and that too only in Bangalore. Now, therefore, what is important is that it reflects that we have to have need-based infrastructure. Depending upon what kind of courts we are to function. So, though consumer courts may have one kind of need, and normal courts may have different kind of needs. And when we come to, as was told by Deepika also, say POCSO courts, etc., it may have different kinds of needs. So therefore, all these needs are to be taken into consideration, and on that basis, infrastructure is to be created. And secondly, as I said, that today, and because of this pandemic also, the need there is a now necessity which is felt, that we have to have hybrid hearing, and for this purpose the technology, etc., has to come, has to be introduced in a long way, in a big way. And I would only end thereafter. There would be discussion by only saying that, look, in consumer, as far as consumer disputes are concerned, ODR is going to play a major role, online dispute resolution. Not only the COVID period has taught us, but even otherwise, consumer courts, consumer disputes are eminently suitable for online dispute resolution, because this is one of the projects recently undertaken by Niti Aayog as well. And incidentally, I was the chairman of that advisory committee which come out with that. And we have understood that apart from one or two more other sectors, main sector would be consumer sector, where we would be needing. And the question is only that this report has come, whether there would be, and there should be, an action on this report by the government and other stakeholders, including judiciary. For that, I would end by saying that what Deepika had also mentioned, that Justice Ramanna's recent speech, where he has said about it. And good thing is that he is going to be the Chief Justice, next Chief Justice of India. And we hope and expect that as Chief Justice of India, he will walk the talk. And what he has said, he will take action on that. So with that, I congratulate the entire team who had produced this stupendous report, and my good luck to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Justice Sikri, for that extremely insightful and encouraging keynote address. We are extremely grateful for your kind words. And your opening remarks were in fact music to my ears. Your comment that we need to look outside the system to see where the solutions lie. That is in fact the entire approach of Jaldi Innovation Lab. As you mentioned, we had come out with a report in 2019, and this was based on a survey of around 665 district courts across the country, where we identified severe shortcomings on several baseline parameters that the NCMS report had in fact laid out. After coming out with that report, the question for us was, what next? Because as legal researchers, that is the limitation we have. That we can only put out the numbers, but we actually don't have solutions with us. And that is how this entire pilot was born. And the result is there for all of us to see that with the right kind of expertise, we will be able to take the narrative towards solutions rather than being stuck with problems. With that, I will move on to the panel discussion. We do have fantastic panelists here with us today to dissect what the problem itself is, where the bottlenecks are to improve the status of court infrastructure in the country, and then we proceed to identify how exactly we can improve court infrastructure. So while the report itself is on consumer fora, we will try to make this discussion more broad-based and cover court infrastructure in general. Before we start with the panel discussion, I think it will be helpful for us to run a quick poll for our audience to get a sense of what their expectations or experience with court infrastructure has been so far. Jasmeet, can you just put up the poll question, please? The first one. Jasmeet, are you there? Yes, thank you. So this is the first poll question that the audience can answer. So the question is, how do you feel about the judiciary when you visit courts? So courts as a physical space vis-a-vis judiciary as an institution. The first option is respect and reverence for the judiciary's authority. The second option is nervousness because of its imposing or confusing structures. The third option is it gives you a sense of comfort that justice will be done. And the fourth option is that you feel structure of a court has nothing to do with how you feel about the judiciary. I request the audience to kindly participate in this poll. We will keep it open for roughly 10 seconds. And I guess the panelists and the host cannot participate. I'm sorry. I think we can close this, Jasmeet, and open up the results. Oh, amazing. And as expected. So a majority of them think that, it gives them a sense of nervousness because of the imposing structure of the judiciary, or generally how confusing the entire architecture of the court is. We can close this, Jasmeet. Thank you. So I guess this is a great opening insight for the panel discussion. And I would like to start with Dr. Sondhi, who is one of the key stakeholders in the system. He is a key user as a lawyer of different kinds of court systems and more importantly, the higher judiciary. Justice Sikri, sorry, soon to be, but Dr. Sondhi, one of the things that we keep hearing about court infrastructure, as with the police, in fact, is that it is colonial, imposing, and distant from the common person in its overall ethos and approach. Do you think the architecture of the building, the seating arrangements, etc., have a say in how the judiciary is perceived? And to your mind, is the grandeur, especially of the higher judiciary, somewhat desirable?
Thanks, Deepika. Firstly, may I say what a pleasure it is to share this space with Justice Sikri and my esteemed panelists. And my congratulations to Vidhi and Srishti on this very important and unique work. Look, you're right in saying that certain colonial remnants of the law need to be relooked at. But when we speak of the aesthetic of the high courts, especially let's say the Karnataka High Court that we're familiar with, those are things that perhaps colonial legacies need to be credited for. The aesthetic and feel of the Karnataka High Court, I can tell you, is amongst the best in the country, with the Cubbon Park on one side and the Vidhan Soudha on the other, and the layout, I'm sure you're familiar with it. And that, in my personal view, maybe I'm speaking as a counsel and not as a client, but in my personal view, I think that setup, in fact, enhances your productivity, right? There was a time when there was a proposal to demolish the Karnataka High Court in 1982. And interestingly, it was a PIL filed before the High Court itself, which led to it being preserved. And thank God for that. Otherwise, today we would not have this majestic building. And that is in some way true of many high courts. If you were to visit Bombay or even the Nagpur bench or Madras and so on, they have a certain aesthetic to them. And we can't therefore throw the baby out with the bathwater. We have to consider the heritage of these buildings. Of course, if it means improving them in some fashion to make them more accessible, I think Justice Sikri made an important point that access to justice and accessibility to places of justice in a sense are interrelated. And if there are things that are coming in the way there, most certainly they can be looked at. But that can't be at the cost of the existing infrastructure and aesthetic that you have. If I can give you an example, now in your panel, the poll that you carried, a lot of people felt that there is an intimidation that they feel while coming to the court. Of course, I saw only 15 voted, but maybe that would still reflect what a lot of people feel. Now, even the Supreme Court is a majestic building, but Justice Sikri will bear me out that other than the Chief's Court and the first 2 or 3 courts, the other court halls are smaller. Now, as a result of that, on a busy miscellaneous day, sometimes even lawyers would find it difficult to enter or exit the court. Your case would be called and you would be at the back of the queue and not be able to make space to reach up front or sit down. Now, that can interfere sometimes with justice delivery. And therefore, if that is the problem, it's a logistical problem, it can be solved. And in fact, the Supreme Court has solved it considerably. You will be aware that recently court halls were reimagined in a sense. The layout of the courts in the Supreme Court has changed over the last couple of years. Courts have been merged, their layout has become horizontal, there's more space. And in that sense, it's more welcoming and less intimidating. So I do therefore feel that the spatial dimensions of courts are important, but it's horses for courses. Now, the trial court in Bangalore will have problems of its own. If you visited the trial court here on a busy morning with 4 floors, with not enough elevators, not enough parking, it's intimidating not just to the client, but even to the counsel, that will you make it to court in time? Can there be a better regulation of that process, right? The Mayo Hall is a grand old building in Bangalore. But if we can deal with these aspects, then that makes access better. And look, at the end of the day, ultimately, if counsels are performing better in court willy-nilly, it means justice delivery is being served, right? It's not that clients are parties in person. More often than not, it's counsels who are arguing cases for them. And in that sense, charity begins at home. If the setup in the court is more welcoming, more accessible, more comfortable to the counsel, that's half the battle won. I do, though, want to say one more thing here. The report, as Justice Sikri pointed out, deals essentially with consumer courts. Now, consumer courts stand on a different footing from, say, constitutional courts. By their very definition, consumer courts are supposed to be more consumer friendly, not just in terms of their spatial layout, but even in the substantive law. There's less formality. Oral evidence is not required to be led, generally speaking. Your replies are to be filed within a short span of time. Orders are supposed to be passed faster. Technicalities of Evidence Act, procedure, code, etc. don't apply. And even jurisdiction, many times an arbitration clause will not preclude a consumer from approaching the court. That's true even of arbitration, right? Arbitration is far more informal in the manner in which it is conducted than the courts. But that's not to say that the informality of arbitration can then be picked up and para-dropped on the way constitutional courts function. So I therefore want to say that there is a middle path here. What's good for the consumer court, what's good for arbitration may not necessarily apply straight away to, say, the high courts or the Supreme Court. But yes, of course, there is need to relook at how welcoming these spaces are. If I can quickly take another minute and give you a couple of illustrations. You know, in Karnataka, the Karnataka High Court introduced, wheelchair access. It's not something that we had till a few years ago. That's a step in the right direction, right? There was a recent administrative order that provides for sanitary napkins to be dispensed in a machine, right? By the intervention of the High Court, a creche has been established in the family court. That also ties up with what Justice Sikri was saying, that when folks are visiting the family court, they have children with them. The children may not even be involved in the dispute. But then a parent may have to bring a young child to the court because there's nowhere else to leave that child. Then what happens? Is that not a scarring of that young adult? And if there's a creche, it makes things easier. Why is it that we have a metro station right outside the Karnataka High Court and that takes you to the trial court? It's not an accident, right? These are things that have been planned to make access and accessibility better. So therefore, I would say, yes, if there are colonial or other remnants that are coming in the way of enhancing access and accessibility, most certainly they need to be looked at and re-looked at, but not at the cost of the existing heritage and aesthetic that we have in place.
Thank you for those comments, Dr. Sondhi. And I totally understand where you're coming from. As people practicing in Bangalore, we are, of course, huge fans of our High Court building as well as the district court functioning out of Mayo Hall. So it is hard for us to imagine doing away with those buildings entirely, surely. But I guess that is where the problem lies, because most of our courts function out of pre-existing buildings which were not designed to function as courts. Now the problem is, how do we now change those courts? Retrofitting needs to be done based on principles that are now coming out in the field of design and architecture. That is one part of the problem. The other part of the problem is even the thinking regarding design being non-existent, even when we are constructing new buildings. And that is where I would like to take the next question to Justice Sikri. Justice Sikri, you have you've done several hats within the judiciary as a system. You've been the judge of a high court, chief justice of a high court, and then functioned as a judge of the Supreme Court, and now as chairperson of NCMS. So you truly know the system inside out. So what we see popularly regarding court infrastructure is that it is truly restricted to building more courtrooms, or perhaps building more court buildings. But what do you see as the narrative regarding truly reimagining court infrastructure in the country, whether that is even possible given the processes that are currently in place? Considering that what we have right now as a structure is high court committees working with PWDs, which then needs to be sanctioned by state governments. So given the existing processes, how do you see the way forward for court infrastructure?
It's a very good question. And since it is in continuation of the earlier question, which was put to Dr. Sondhi, let me take it from where Dr. Sondhi left, and then I'll come to this question also specifically. Of course, we have seen the audience poll and the way they stated about the intimidation. I was a little wondering, not about the result. Let me be clear at the beginning itself, but about the perception, in what way it is taken. There are two aspects to it. One is which Dr. Sondhi highlighted about the heritage buildings, and there may not be sufficient infrastructure going by the technological advancements, etc., and the needs of the courts as of today, when all that has to be imbibed in or included in a building which is a heritage building, and it may not permit that kind of innovation to be introduced because of its limitation about its structure, etc. Whether the audience poll was because of that reason, or it was intimidating because of their experience when they visit the courts. I hope I'm clear, because many times when you visit court, the court may be a beautiful building. Let us presume that it doesn't lack in infrastructure, etc., because I'm not stating from that. But the very presence of the court, the way it is set up, the court setup, which is so authoritative, in the sense that which you have taken care of insofar as consumer courts are concerned, but going by the purpose of those courts, that there should not be hierarchical system, and it should not be that the judges are sitting on a high pedestal, and the very presence of the judges in that sense sometimes appears to be daunting. It appears to be intimidating. Let me tell you, many years ago, maybe 20-25 years ago, or almost 15 to 20 years ago, I can say so safely, there was some this kind of survey conducted by in the this UK judiciary, as to what is the experience of litigants or the consumers of justice or the litigants who go there, and the same expressions were used. Some said it is intimidating, fearsome, daunting, and all. So it was not going by the infrastructure, but it was the manner in which the court proceedings are conducted. So what I was saying, that I'm not too sure whether the while making this poll, audience was talking about the infrastructure or talking about this. But that may be one thing. Actually, on that there are many debates. Sometimes they say that no, the function of the court is such, as it is said by the very celebrated American author about the judiciary, that it is weakest among the wings of the state, executive, the legislature and the judiciary. It is the weakest, as it has neither the purse nor the sword. But it survives on the faith of the people. It survives because of the people trust that system. They know that they will get justice from there. So therefore, in that sense, in order to even make the executive obey its orders, there has to be some aura of authority. That is one argument, which is always say, some aura of authority in those who are deciding the cases, so that their command is obeyed. But of course, it's a matter of debate. I'm not going into that debate, but coming to only I wanted to raise that issue, that I'm not sure that what was contemplated by the participants when they said it was because of this season or it was because of the infrastructure. But coming to infrastructure, even if it is because of so, let me give you one example again of Singapore Supreme Court. Few years ago, maybe 10-15 years ago, Singapore Supreme Court was also in a beautiful heritage building. At that time, they had to decide that they also knew that many kinds of facilities, and particularly the introduction of technology in this building, may not be possible. So we should come out with a new building, a new structure, which should be technologically friendly. And there was a debate, and I know that there were a debate among the people also and stakeholders also, whether they should give up, abandon that heritage building and come to the new building. Ultimately, they decided, no, we will have to have our new building, because we want all those kinds of facilities in that infrastructure, which is more important from the point of view of access to justice than only the heritage advantage of an old building. Of course, Dr. Sondhi may be right in sticking to that, but then it is again becomes a matter of perception. As far as Singapore is concerned, it did not stick to this heritage factor, but they shifted to new building, and it is now rated as one of the best building when it comes to the infrastructure. But so therefore, there has to be, I mean, these are the aspects which need to be debated more seriously. That on the one hand, we have to have, yes, it has its own aura as far as heritage buildings are concerned, no doubt about it. But then the question is, if under the circumstances in that building, all that is sought to be introduced by way of infrastructure is possible, yes, we must retain the heritage also. Why not? We should lean in favor. But if that is not possible, then we should not cling to, okay, it is heritage and we are not going to give it up. So that is, and we have to see it with open mind. So therefore, from this, I now come to the specific question you have asked. And in a way, I have answered also that all that infrastructure which is needed and which we have discussed in the report also, it is discussed, and I also hinted in some aspects that all that is now today, it is necessary for any good court in order to see that not only the stakeholders are comfortable, it's a physical comfort, because that has to be there. We have seen the times, I tell you very frankly, it was not very, very long ago, maybe 15, 20 years ago, I'm talking of some small mofussils, etc., where for want of courtrooms, sometimes it was the court is court proceedings are conducted in lawns. Court proceedings are conducted in a toilet. Would you believe that? And with no other facilities provided to the judge. There are many instances there were when the judges were not having the facility of stenos. Even the papers on which the order sheet has to be written were not adequately provided. They were, if they run short of pages and they send a requisition for many days, it would not be given. Those were also the time. Of course, fortunately, that is the thing of past, no doubt about it. But it is, I'm highlighting it to say that, look, under these circumstances, also the judges have worked and the lawyers and litigants have appeared. But therefore, physical comfort is also very, very necessary. As it was said about the utilities, which the entire list which is given, that is very, very necessary. And apart from that, the smooth process for which all other facilities are needed is also very, very necessary. So we have to have that. And it, therefore, as I said earlier also, that for this, what should be the infrastructure, what kind of facilities it should have, we have to reach out to the experts like Mr. Raheja and Brinda Sastry, who are sitting here. And we should not have any reservations about it. And we should be, I'm talking on the part of judiciary. Judiciary should approach this subject with open mind. And whatever is necessary, and which is shown in this report, also in your 2000 report as well, that is the need of the hour. And that is a process towards, I would again repeat, achieving the real justice.
Thank you, Justice Sikri. Clearly, we have come a long way from how courts used to function earlier, and thank God for that. But now we will have to explore how to really push the narrative in the right direction. And that is where we move on to the next segment of exploring with the design and architecture experts as to how to really reimagine court infrastructure for a 21st century India. Mr. Raheja, you have heard from the experts in the legal domain, you've heard from the judge, you've heard from a senior advocate regarding why really the condition of the courts are the way they are. Sometimes it may be aura, sometimes it may be, constraint because we are working out of old buildings or rented buildings. So retrofitting is what typically happens to convert an existing building into functional court premises. But what is encouraging is what we heard last week from Justice Ramana, who said that modernization of judicial infrastructure does not mean building more courts alone, but we have to think of an efficient judicial infrastructure which provides equal and free access to justice. What I want to understand from you is, what does it really mean to build an efficient, barrier-free, and citizen-friendly infrastructure in terms of architecture and design principles? We do know that NCMS baseline for courts mentions universal design principles. What does it really mean in the context of judiciary and Indian courts? If we can hear from you, Dr. Raheja, please.
Okay, thanks, Deepika. First of all, I would again say it is really an honor to be sharing this dais and moment with Justice Sikri and Dr. Sondhi. I've never had the opportunity to face myself in a jury like this. But nevertheless, I will speak from my heart than from any professional perspective, because I think I'm also in the shoes of a common citizen before I choose to be an architect. And the joy of the subject of architecture is, it teaches you a little bit of theatrics because it allows you to empathetically consider yourself as a small child if you're designing a kindergarten. And it also gives you the empathy to imagine yourself in the shoes of a 70 or an 80-year-old person who is maybe elderly, while imagining also yourself as a common, I would say, not just a man, but a woman. This was the mistake that the 20th century architecture did, which assumed only the Leonardo da Vinci man and kept on designing everything, assuming that there is a perfect human, which is also a gender-based man, and kept on ignoring till we arrived in 21st century, which please allow me to say, the way I look at society and the social fractures of today, I'm pretty sure while 21st century can celebrate its freedom of expression and many other things, I'm also pretty sure they are all going to land us into zones of disputes, because it's intolerant to any small level of crime or oppression as well, right? When I say this and my connect to the idea of justice, equity, and the principles of inclusion that we're talking about, I want to, go a little step back because I know we very often use the word building, and I have some very strong reservation on that. One is, I would say the language is an expression of thought, and the thoughts really translate into materialism as the way we see it. The way the British thought is the way the British designed. The way the 20th century India, post-independent India thought in the form of public buildings, it designed. And the way the 21st century thought, it's also started, I think it changed. I'm sorry to say, but it massacred Bangalore as well, despite the intent of doing good by putting a lot of glass in a climatically unfriendly way as well. Right. So having said this, I would say, so therefore, I'm not using the word building. Right. I want to change one terminology here, and I can tell you a change of term can change the way we think. And if I would say, let's say courts are not buildings, and for that matter, any building is not a building, but creates an environment to function the purpose for which it has been created, right? And I ask a question in a very empathetic way that a court is also a space where the guards have to function. The court is also a space where the clerk has to function. The court is also the space where the counsel and the clients have to meet. And the court is also a space where the judges have to meet. So the first distinction that we have to bring here is that the court is not meant for that one Leonardo da Vinci man, but for a whole range of humanity. And we have to see it from everyone's shoes. And when I see the court from the eyes of a child, it's absolutely intimidating. And maybe because I consider I have a heart of a child, I too am pretty scared to walk into the courts, except for doing design case studies. Because the question is not about just the design, it's the language that it imposes as a form. And the language that it imposes as a form, most often, I don't know, we still need to do these kind of behavioral studies across the country. Is the court meant for convicts, or is the court meant for bringing conscience and clarity to justice? And most often, because the imagination, which is, I know it's untrue, it's imagined as convicts, therefore the sense of fear is far more, right? On the contrary, we find the convicts are so hardened criminals that they have no impact. They have reached a level of insanity where the built form makes no impact on them, but the tenderness of the humanity that walks into it, be it in the form of a woman or a child or a family as a dispute, or why should we go further, could be a poor farmer coming clad in dhoti, maybe bare feet. Are we sensitive to the fact that what is the temperature of the stone on which he walks in? Because we have assumed that everybody is kind of full. So it is at that level of sensitivity where I feel, if I can give you that kind of thing, as a small resolution, which I just thought over when we were discussing here, as a pair of binaries about what we think of the 5 letters of the courts, the C, right? The first C, I would say as a binary, and this is what I'm saying is can change the design language. One is, do we look at the C as the clarity or the complementing nature of the citizen? Or do we look at it as a conflict or a chaos about a convict, right? The approach will change. The second O is whether it is about the openness of the experience of that space with a sense of good observation, because I think a judge is also trained to observe so well and hear. And is that the magnanimity of that court, or is it the O of oppression and opposition? Right? The U of the court to me would be the YOU, which means you first, or is it the I first approach that it brings? And I believe if you're talking about a citizen-friendly perspective, it has to be the you first and not the I first, which the current contemporary constitutional courts speak as a language. They speak I first, I am the might. And that's when you see and watch a news channel that the honorable court has mentioned something, it just brings the building. It never brings the people in the front because it wants to send a message of scare that it is I saying it. But today we are in a time when even I can be questioned. And the 21st century, which I believe is being praised for its openness, it has to be you first, and then only the I can come. The other U also is about the universality, because we're talking about universal design, which believes there is a commonality across all of us. Even the judge has to use the same washroom as the convict. My question is, I still go in many public buildings where there is still hanging board which says officers' toilets. And I'm still wondering what is the other toilet called? And how do you dignify these statements with the choice of materials and the choice of spatial standards, right? So space is speaking a very, very fabulous language here. The R of the courts, I would say, is about a reflective and a respectful future versus a rights or a regulatory approach in design. So far, the design that we see is pretty much rights driven and regulatory. And that's why I think the justice mentioned that is about the opportunity to look beyond who we are. So if you never allow anyone else to look beyond yourself, you would remain regulatory, you would remain rights-based, but rights at what cost? So it's rights and rules which remain, but the humans have been axed across the whole thing. Whereas I think the 21st century idea could be, it's just a mandate which I'm proposing, could be extremely reflective. The courts should be spaces where everybody walks in with respect. Because I would say, if it's about justice, I don't think there cannot be a better term than temple. I mean, temple accepting universality of religion, because the respect would come from the heart, not from the empires of state that we build around. And the T that we have in the courts that we are looking at, is it going to stand for transparency? Is it going to stand for technology? Or is it going to stand for trust? Versus the binary of treachery, that I got cheated from this court and therefore I have to walk from the lower court to the higher court, right? I don't know what is a sense that I get from that built form. And I would say a small example like a material, bringing in a little bit of glass. Please do not mistake my saying this. Glass is a very important particular material, but it has many forms. It has forms of being completely like a mirror, to being completely translucent, to being completely transparent. But if it is intelligently used, it can bring that transparency, and the transparency can build trust, and the trust can actually avoid the ideas of intimidation. And I would say, why couldn't the 21st century consumer court be a conceptualized built form in as modern infrastructure as for everyone else? I know it would be a setback for the ones who are still logged into that shoe, and which is why a constructive debate and discourse is vital for the architecture of the future. And the S that we are talking about, I would say, will hold the rest, which is the sense and sensibility of court as a space, right? Versus the kind of sophistication that we unfortunately get into because we think it is a space of sophistication which undermines the citizen as somebody who has access. So access is not really just physical. Yes, I'm absolutely all for it, that we can do it even in more detail in terms of elements that can bring that access. But the underlying paradigm, as I'm again saying, is I would prefer to use codes or environments, and environments are never complete without just the structure. It also engages the humans who are part of the services, right? So without the culture shift, and culture shift has to begin somewhere. So I would not even use the word change. I would use the word transformation. And transformation is possible within a certain period of time without a forced change. And I think that's not possible without keeping, say, few thoughts in mind, which is where I would rest my case. One, bringing in nature into the courts. Why are courts going to be boxes which are dumped with files and dust? Why not nature and ecology be part of that experience? I want to ask a question to a clerk or a stenographer. Does he enjoy his job, and does he look after his looking forward for the next day to go to the courts. These would be the small experiments which would tell us that people, because they're also workspaces. Courts are not just spaces of justice, they're also spaces for people to deliver a service, and also a workspace for myself. I would imagine to ask the son of a guard or a person who manages the parking there, do you enjoy your father's job and role there? And you would find, at least in India, we still relate a lot to the kind of chair, the kind of position, the kind of shelter that person gets in a particular space. And coming from that culture, I would say a security guard's role can be extremely dignified if the right ecology, the right landscape is part of it. That's one. Number two, why can't we bring color? We know black and white remain the key uniforms, and no offense to that, the rest all can be colors. I hope no rule rejects that idea, and bringing in color can bring in at least some degree of positivity. You know, you never know what a person is going through, and we are all psychological beings. We are not just physical bodies, and colors have an important sense, not just as part of signage, but as part of even building materials. And there you have an opportunity to respect the local culture. Why the court in Kochi should be the same as court in Chandigarh? Why the court in Tirupati or Guwahati should be the same as Ahmedabad? Why couldn't the local culture be part of it, which is what as architects we keep talking about? Respect the context. Otherwise, let's build all as New York courts or all as Singapore courts. If it makes no difference, then why not that kind of an approach? So I think the local materials can provide us that kind of an opportunity to connect the people from there. The third, I would say, is the idea of bringing in material shifts, like using transparent materials as glass, etc., which can support certain kind of technologies. I'm not saying glass in a climatic unfriendly way, but glass in the sense it can retain some degree of cleanliness for the technologies that you need to in-house and keep them as part of it. And the fourth thing I would say here is the court itself. Actually, you know, if you go back to its historical meaning, it can actually take you to courtyards. Though I know we do not have courtyards in all courts, but courtyards can be very public friendly spaces, because a court is also a public space. And I would look at these spaces, imagining myself in some position of a dispute. Do courts have spaces where I can be with myself? Do courts have spaces where I can meditate to myself? I can pray to myself? Or do courts have also spaces where I can be isolated with security? Do courts have spaces where I can feel little friendly, taking away from the court proceedings within the same space? And I don't know, I saw the entire adjacency diagram. I was wondering, maybe, I guess so, if the 21st century wants to take it forward, can courts also have spaces which are called counseling rooms? Because, you know, post a judgment or the harassment of a prolonged judgment, which may take a decade, requires, I would say, at least require human counseling. And can there be those spaces which can be part of such rehabilitation, when somebody who has not made any offense and is yet a kind of victim can be provided these kind of descriptions? So I would say it can only happen if we start looking at a constructive approach by a disruptive analogy to the past, and take things forward for a future wherein I think we can all come together, and courts, the sea of courts, can actually become celebrating environments of access to justice, rather than sad environments of convict and crime. So I think, you know, this is the perspective. But coming to the universal design principles that you mentioned, I think there are a couple of principles about that. But one principle, because we were part of the universal design India theory. So one universal design which is mostly being used is the American side, which is absolutely fair. But the two additional principles we projected from India was one for economic affordance, and the second was for cultural sensitivity, which is not there in the existing guidelines. But one of the most interesting principles that I really admire from the UD principles is the principle of tolerance for error. So courts are also to be places which tolerate the errors of humans while giving them, because I think the intent of justice is not to punish, but to reform humanity, right? And that is why we never talk about death sentence. So can courts also be buildings of reformation by those tolerance for errors, both in physical and cognitive sense? I think there can be many such ways in which we can take it forward. But I think it does require some kind of a discourse which disrupts the analogies of the past, so that we can construct new meanings, new build forms, which are open to the public criticism. But I think that would be the beginning of public participation in building the future courts of India. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Raheja, for those extremely thought-provoking comments. And I think each one of those will require a day-long discussion at the very least. But I think this essentially underscores the importance of, having these continuing conversations, especially with an interdisciplinary approach. I know we are running out of time. In fact, we have, but with the permission of panelists, I will just take 5 more minutes to seek Ms. Shastri's comments and then go on to closing remarks. Ms. Shastri, you have heard from the other panelists and you know the constraints that we are working with, but you as an urban planner who is designing public spaces and has interest in participatory processes, how would you truly approach judicial infrastructure? Who do you think are the right sets of people who should be in the room while talking about court infrastructure? Because even within design and architecture, we know that there are multiple, super specializations. So if you can throw some light on that. You're on mute, Ms. Shastri.
Thank you, Deepika. I have to again, just like everybody else did, commend the group for bringing out this really fantastic report. And it does take into consideration a lot of the processes that were discussed prior to this report coming out. In the spirit of the discussion that has already been had in this forum, I would like to continue to talk about a few of the aspects. I think many of the aspects that I wished to speak about has been covered, but in terms of, I'll go specifically to the question you asked, Deepika, about the approach. And being in this position where I am interested in looking at how public spaces get designed, and my specific interest in participatory approaches, I would say that there are few steps that one can take, and these would first, deal with understanding who the stakeholders are in this whole process, which I think the report has done to some extent, where I would like to make a very distinct differentiation between the people who are providing the service of justice, which is your judicial members and the various court lawyers, and the staff, the administrative staff that is supporting the back end for this whole process to happen. And then, of course, the user groups, the people who are coming there to receive the service. So if we distinguish these as separate entities, and there are others who, there are many layers to this whole thing. One has to understand the day-to-day activities and the time that people spend in the space. The time factor, I feel, is very crucial, because that kind of conditions you and conditions your experience in the space, and the manner in which you respond to the various organizations in terms of the infrastructure and the way facilities are being provided is something which will condition the experience. So keeping that in mind, I was just thinking that the question to ask is that how do we identify certain principles that will uphold the values of the judiciary system? And if we start to identify those, which I know we have already kind of discussed it in terms of, fairness and equality, and the idea of access to justice itself, which has already been discussed. If we start identifying those principles that uphold the judiciary system, we need to start to understand how do they get translated into the design of the spaces itself. And in continuation of that, the other question to ask is that how do we make the process democratic and participatory at one level, where you would want to involve every kind of individual, like already mentioned by Professor Gaurav, the child and the women and people coming from rural areas, how do we kind of look at their experiences and concerns? And the experience would be, the approach to go about doing this is first to define what are the needs of each of these groups in terms of, when they come and experience the space or seek a service. There are also aspects of understanding the diversity needs. There are people from diverse backgrounds, even aspects of cultural as well as language. Another thing that is, not everybody can speak the language that is being spoken at the courts. And hence, the opportunities for how those kinds of experiences are enhanced by, either finding interpreters or other ways of using technology to do this kind of aspect. So that becomes a part of the infrastructure. And how to kind of, what are the tools that you would use to actually implement some of these aspects which are related to signages, maps, the directional aspects, the idea of colors, textures, which are already have been talked about. And the other aspect about, besides the user's experience, how does one orient themselves? How do you feel comfortable? How do you feel safe in the space? All of these can come only by actually involving each of these user groups, be it a sweeper or the judge who's sitting and providing that service of justice. So so that would be the aspect of experience. The other aspect was about the image of the court building itself and the ideology that that building would represent. How does that building design affect the perception of how law is practiced? And how does it actually affect the perception of whether the service that is being provided is going to be provided satisfactorily or not? Will it be, I'm just going to raise a few questions here, which is for thought very quickly. And the idea, like, will the image be a top-down or an authoritarian kind of an image? Should the building be an iconic building where it would represent the city's image at some level, especially for the higher courts, right? Like the one that we just spoke about in Bangalore. It is an iconic building. It has a legacy. It has memories, and it does seem to resonate with a lot of the population of the city. But at the same time, how does a general user who's approaching the court feel about this? There are a whole the whole aspect of how do we make the building design be formal on one hand, because the idea of providing the service of justice is in a way going through a whole legal and formal system. But on the other hand, how do we make it more accessible? And the question to ask would be, can it be made egalitarian in its design approach rather than, something that is imposing or bringing in a very authoritarian kind of a impression? So how do the occupants feel like they're being treated equally across all the systems, all the services as you enter the building? So this is a question of what kind of an image the building portrays, and the approach towards that would be, once again, I would advocate for the fact that the process has to be very inclusionary. It has to be participatory. If you do not understand each person's objectives of why they're there and how they actually spend time in those premises, you would not be able to actually come out with this kind of a more egalitarian approach towards the design. And of course, there are the design elements that can be incorporated, which will affect the way the aesthetics of the place is, interior, especially the interiors, the way the light flows into the space, the way the materials are being used, how you use local materials and make the building contextual. So one has to also remember that the spaces of the court are spaces typically of contestation, and how does one actually not perpetuate this feeling of confrontation, but also kind of bring in an ambience of where you can have debate and maybe some sort of a reconciliation or mediation in the process. So the whole question is that on one hand, you have the objective approach towards design, like, there are certain things that you have to have as specifics. And on the other hand, you have the subjective approach, which is talking about how the design can shape the whole spatial experience, and also the image of the place itself. So, as one of the designers, Donald Norman, said, design is the communication between the object and the user. And how to make that experience of the place meaningful for the user is, and I think it's already been discussed earlier, is like, the consumer and the object of use. How does that correlationship happen? And can we approach this through a more sensitive way, where we can actually reconcile between any of those dichotomies that we face when we design a building of this sort? So I think I'll stop there, because a lot of the other points have been covered, and we can go to the next. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brinda, for those very, very pertinent questions. And as I said, this is the first of its kind webinar, and I'm sure this is first of the many, because clearly there are a lot of points that need further deliberation, discussion, and it is in the mutual interest of all the panelists here and stakeholders at large to continue to have these conversations. I know we have overshot the time slot considerably, so I wouldn't want to keep the panelists for much longer, especially on a busy Monday. So what I would request is a last segment to this is to ceremonially launch the report. And by that, I just mean that the panelists hold up the report, the hard copy of the report that has been sent across to you all, for a quick snap. Thank you so much for that. Jasmeet, I hope you got the screenshot of that. Thank you so much, all of you, all the panelists and the audience, for patiently being with us, and panelists especially for sharing your thoughts. As I said, this is the first of many such conversations. We thank you so much for your time and for your support and appreciation. Thank you so much for joining us today. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, everyone. And congratulations to the team, Vidhi and authors, for this brilliant compilation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, sir. Thank you all.
Jasmeet, can you stop